Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is the Aqua Acoustics Voce S3 digital to analog converter. This is a $4,600 to $4,700 US dollar ladder DAC, pure ladder DAC, NOS only, meaning non-oversampling, no digital filter in this. Digital analog converter from Italian-based audio company Aqua Acoustics. This was a loan to me by a friend of the channel. Aqua Acoustics has no idea that I have this or I'm going to do this review. It is just a loan. It will be going back to that friend of the channel when I am done with this here very shortly. So thanks to that friend of the channel. This also means that there are no affiliate links or anything like that on this video in the description below. I will link to Aqua Acoustics' website down below where you can read more about this piece. It is available still from a few high-end retailers around the internet, so check that out just with a simple Google search to see where you can get it. And again, the price is typically in the $4,600 to $4,700 US dollar range. All right. This was a very interesting review because this DAC has a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde nature to it, to my ears. And where it's Jekyll and where it's Hyde is important and is going to influence your decision making, I think, as to whether or not you are a good candidate for this DAC. So are you a good candidate for this DAC? Some of you will be, some of you won't be. All right, stick around right after shameless self-promotion to find out.
Hello. I'm one of the reasons that Wave Theory can't spend all of his money on audio gear. He wants you to know that your support is vital for keeping the channel running. So if you enjoy Wave Theory's bussin' review riz and no-cap review style and want to encourage him to stay in the basement so I don't have to listen to his dad jokes as much, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also send him a donation on PayPal or sign up for the Patreon. Links are in the description. Now on to the review.
In previous videos of other reviews that I have done of other gear, I have mentioned using the Voce as a DAC for amplifiers and headphones that I have published reviews of recently. And I called it the Voce in there because, you know, I'm based in the United States and I don't always pick up on when I should be using different accents and all of that. Because this is Italian, the correct pronunciation of this unit is Voce. And if you want to say that with the pinched fingers to just give it a little bit more impact, Voce, okay? I get it. It is a lot of fun. Comment down below if you just did it. All right? So anyway, in Italian, translating the Voce into English means the voice, which is kind of neat and just in a little bit of trivia information there. All right. The Voce S3, which I think stands for Series 3, meaning this is the third iteration of the Voce, is again a pure ladder DAC with an FPGA controller in it, which means that, and it's a sine magnitude resistor ladder array in there, which means that it is an R2R DAC, if you're familiar with that. It uses an array of resistors that are laid out in a geometric pattern that looks like a ladder to convert the incoming ones and zeros of the digital bit stream into the analog waveform that comes out. It is a NOS-only DAC, meaning a non-oversampling DAC. There is no digital filtering in this device at all. Right, and that to me is where the Jekyll and Hyde nature comes out a little bit, because there is one area in particular where I think it needs a digital filter and it doesn't have one, and we'll talk more about that here in just a moment. Through the USB input, it can decode PCM files up to 24 bits and 384 kilohertz in sampling rate, and it can also decode direct stream digital or DSD up to DSD 128. All right, my real quick takeaways on this DAC here are that it can sound excellent, and I have mentioned its Jekyll and Hyde behavior already a little bit here. And the fact that it is a NOS-only DAC, or a non-oversampling-only DAC, I think is both its strength and its weakness. I noticed a big change in sonic behavior on this piece when I moved from 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz digital audio tracks, okay, where it did not sound particularly good to these ears. Okay, but when I moved up to 24-bit tracks, and that's the key there, moving up to 24-bit tracks, be they 48 kilohertz, 88.2, 96, 192, and so on up to 384, and kilohertz of sampling rate, then this started to sound much better, and in some circumstances would technically compete with my venerable and trusty Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC, which has been my personal reference for a long time. All right, but again, you have to do some things on the front end to get it to be able to sound that good consistently, and then even then there are some sonic presentations to it that are not going to be for everyone. So we're going to unpack all of that here as the video progresses, use the timestamps to jump around and see the parts that are of most interest to you. This is not a particularly heavy unit, but it is big and awkward feeling, so I'm going to cut to a video clip where I show you a close-up of the front and back panel and the build. And then we'll come back on the other side and dive into test gear and sound. All right, here we go. We'll do a unit tour, and the Voce is a dead simple device, honestly, because there is no digital filtering in it and it's just a resistor ladder DAC. Basically all that comes in is digital ones and zeros. It goes right through the ladder resistor array and then out the outputs. So in comes the binary ones and zeros, out goes the analog waveform. No preamp, really no kind of processing or anything like that going on. That's it. All right, so this shouldn't take very long in terms of the features. Nice brushed aluminum faceplate here. You get two knobs on the front here, power on and off, and then this rotating digital input selector here, which are just Roman numeral number. These are your digital inputs. There are 4 of them of different types. And I've not seen a DAC do that before, and I had to make myself a little cheat sheet and literally sticky note it to the front here so I could remember what was what on this DAC, because that's the only labeling here. And then there is a 0 and 180-degree phase inverter switch here if you're ever interested in that, and then you get one little glowing LED for power indicator, like power on. It's currently not on, so that light is not on. All right. One thing I do want to note here in terms of the build is that there are 3 rubber feet underneath it to prevent it from sliding around. And what happens with that is you got 2 feet in the front and then 1 in the back in a triangular pattern. I think Denafrips does this as well, but that means if you like push down on one of the corners, okay, it pops up. Okay, you pop a little bit of a wheelie there. So if you ever load something on top of it, it happens on both sides. Okay, just make sure that you are careful with the weighting so that that doesn't happen. And like most of the weight in the DAC, I think the power supply is like closer to the front here because it feels heavier closer to the front. The rest of the chassis is just this aluminum, gray aluminum material that is supposed to help eliminate resonances. It's like there are no ventilation holes or anything on the sides either, so it's pretty simple design there. All right, let me turn the unit around and show you the back panel. All right, back of the unit looks like this. We have input labels 1 through 4 in Roman numerals because, you know, Italian on this unit. So you get 4 digital inputs. My understanding of the way this works is that the standard input assortment that comes with the unit is you get a BNC coax SPDIF input here. You get this AQ link I2S input, which is a bit of an older protocol. I mean, I think this unit kind of dates back to about 2019 or so. Still for sale, best I can tell. That's why it's getting a review. But you know, we're on to more HDMI style connectors here anyway. But if you have an older unit that is compatible with that, there you go. And then here is the USB input here as well. Now, this one right here is labeled modular. There are a few choices you can get in this modular input. One is the AES SPDIF input that you see right here. You can also opt to have a Toast-Link fiber optic input here. You can have an AT&T fiber optic digital input here, or an RCA coax input if you want. Okay, so again, that is selectable depending on like where you buy it and how you order it and all of that, but this one obviously came with the AES. All right, power input over here, standard stuff. And then over here we have the analog audio outputs. We have asynchronous balanced XLR output. I believe asynchronous is the term they use for that. I'm sorry, it's not asynchronous. Asymmetrical. There we go. Asymmetrical RCA, or excuse, I cannot put the right words together. I'm sorry. Asymmetrical 3-pin XLR balanced analog audio output, and then we have RCA single-ended audio output on those as well. I did check both outputs here. I think, as is the case most often when you have both on a DAC, when it is a balanced DAC, and this is a balanced DAC, I really cannot talk in this video, I'm sorry. This is a balanced designed DAC, right, from the ground up, and that generally means that the XLR outputs are the way to go, and they are. You get more resolution and detail and more holographic spatial presentation out of this. These are just as, these sound a little bit warmer, but they are also just not as detailed or as clean or as clear or anything like that as these are. And again, like, they change the spatial presentation a little bit. Okay, now the unit is just coming back to overall build. It is not particularly heavy. It is just big. The resistor ladder array in there probably takes up a fair amount of space. And then it's just like, because of the only 3 feet, it is just a little bit awkward, right, in the way that it is put together. So that's just something you'll have to keep in mind when you put this unit on your shelf or on your rack or on your desk or wherever it is that you're going to use it. All right, back to me on camera talking about sound. All right, test gear for this device is manifold, so stick with me a moment here because this is going to take just a moment just to explain that. Let's start with the digital files that I put through here, because I started to notice some definite performance changes with the file type that it was asked to decode. Any files that I put through here that I used for critical listening would have been lossless FLAC or WAV files or high-res WAV files. So those would be 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz tracks, all the way up through, I put some 24-bit 384 kilohertz tracks through here as well that were upsampled using Galactic Gargle Blaster. See link in the description down below if that is of interest to you. I also tried some DSD files on this as well. Basically everything, all of the files were played locally either through Roon, using a Sonor Ultra Rendu plugged in direct USB to this device as an endpoint, or another Sonor Ultra Rendu routed through a Singer SU6, and then various digital outputs into the non-USB input on here, mostly the BNC coax on that one. Okay. And then all of those files again would have either been played locally or streamed via streamed from Qobuz, again through Roon. I also tried plugging the USB input on this directly into my Microsoft Surface Pro 4 laptop/tablet. That is a Windows 10 based device, and I used Ottervana as a source there to play local files in there, again 1644.1 all the way up through 24.384 FLAC and some DSD in there as well. Okay. And I mention all of that in detail, particularly the different sampling rates and file types, because again, that is where some of the biggest differences came out for this DAC. So more on that in just a moment. Downstream from it, I used mostly the XLR balanced outputs here. I did check the RCA outputs, as I mentioned in the unit tour clip, and they were not as good. So all of my impressions going forward are going to be based on the balanced output of this. And this got routed through a number of different things. Okay, some lesser expensive items in there would have included the Aoun S17 Pro amp. All right, and then just keep going up in price. I used the LTA Velo, a tube amplifier that only has single-ended inputs on it. And so I used a Jensen Isomax transformer converter box to convert the XLR to the RCA so that I could use that safely. I think that is sold out. So sorry, I don't know that that unit is available anymore, the transformer anyway. The Velo very much is available, and I have a review for it. I'll link to it below. You should check that out. All right. Then I would also, other amps would have included my Hi-Fi Man Golden Wave Prelude amplifier, the Nimbus HPA US5 Pro, which I just did a review for. That's a very high-end headphone amp. And then also the LTA Z10E, another very high-end amplifier. All right, so I got a fair cross-section of different amplifiers there. I am primarily a headphone user, and so headphones that I would have used to evaluate this would have included an original HiFiMan Susvara, HiFiMan HE1000 SE, an original Focal Utopia. I also have on loan right now the Focal Utopia 2022. That is in headphone 2. And are there others in there? Probably, but those 5 are all excellent and I feel like gave me a pretty good idea. Is that 5 or is that 6? Anyway, those headphones all there that I just named there are all excellent and I feel give me a pretty good place to evaluate the performance of this piece. All right, so let's get into the sound and we'll go ahead and start with the sampling rates, or the file types I should say, in here where that Jekyll and Hyde nature comes out, because this does not have a digital filter in it, again, NOS only, and I think that it should, quite frankly, because 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz files, be they FLAC or WAV files, to me just did not sound very good through here. They were very forward and harsh in the upper mid-range and lower treble, to where there was a lot of grain and glare and then fatigue coming through, as well as a lot of sibilance. And so the fatigue doesn't come through. The fatigue is the feeling you get when the graininess and the glare and the sibilance are just coming at you rapid fire and a lot. And also it just felt to me and sounded to me, to my ears, and this, you know, probably is just a result of the combination of the glariness and the grain and the sibilance, but it just sounded like the upper mids, lower treble was more forward and gave this an overall brighter sound to it than it normally has with other things. And so, and then it also just like, it sounded a little bit noisy to me also, like just the sonic background, the noise floor on the unit just seemed higher than it should be for a device of this price playing those kinds of files. All right, and so that is a little bit troubling to me insofar as 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz audio still dominates digital audio out there. That is by far the most common digital file type out there at the moment, is either FLAC or WAV files that are 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz. That's the CD audio standard. So if you're going to use this DAC from a CD transport, I just don't recommend doing that, okay? Where I do recommend using this DAC, and where I will talk more about its nature and its sound going forward, is when you step up to, for lack of better term, high resolution files, starting at 24-bit bit depth, okay, or DSD, because DSD sounded fairly decent on this too. Okay. Once you do that, once you use a 24-bit or a DSD file, then I think the true nature of this DAC and its NOS nature, the true nature comes out and its NOS nature becomes an advantage. So here are my sonic impressions based on its good behavior. It's got a fairly neutral tuning. There was a review recently, I think it may have been, of my Matrix Element X2 Pure, that DAC and streamer review, where I mentioned that this might be, the Voce might be a little bit of a V shape in its signature, and I need to walk that back because I think some of what I was hearing was when I was using 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz files to compare this DAC and that DAC, just the harshness and the forwardness of the upper mids, lower trebles coming through. And this DAC does have more bass presence than the Matrix, and so in comparison, it just sounded a little bit V-shaped in compared to that neutral, bright Matrix audio there. But on its own, I think the perceived frequency response on the Voce is really pretty close to true neutral. Now, the frequency extension on it is not elite, but it is not poor. It doesn't really seem to reach way up in the high frequencies or way down in the low frequencies in terms of what it's able to reproduce. So the frequency extension, not poor, it's not significantly lacking, but if you like airiness or you like really deep rumbly sub bass and like lots of it, this is not your DAC. Okay, it's a little bit more kind of down the middle. Not necessarily mid-range focus, because again, the extension isn't poor, but again, like if you are a person who just really likes frequency extension in both directions, this would not be your first choice. Okay. But tonal balance, the tonality of this device is rather solid. There's a pretty natural relationship between fundamental frequencies and their harmonics. When it's doing a file type that it likes, there's not a whole lot of shoutiness or sibilance in the treble or anything like that. It's, you know, fairly well, it's got a lot of smoothness to it too. So like the tonality is fairly accurate and reasonable from everything from like not the true deep sub bass and then not the really high treble, but everything in between in that range. Pretty natural tonality. Decent weight to the tones. They don't sound overly full or overly thin to me. Okay, pretty good balance there. The presentation of the DAC 2 is also, it's smoother, it's more laid back, and it's a little bit less macro focused and a little bit more micro focused. I think I'm borrowing that terminology from a friend who explained it to me, but I think that's a really good way to describe the level of resolution and detail retrieval and how that is presented. So kind of the smooth and laid back nature part, I think, is fairly well understandable, and that is stereotypically characteristic of R2R DACs, in that the Voce has that more relaxed, smooth, kind of laid back sound. Now let's talk about that, you know, like a little less macro and a little more micro kind of focus. This is not an overly dynamic or impactful DAC. It's not going to hit very hard. It's not lacking in dynamics, but it's not the focus of its sound or its presentation either. And then subtle things like the subtle detail retrieval and the texturing and that sort of thing might be brought up just a little bit in presence as compared to some other units that are out there. I've heard others, other DACs, other amps, even other headphones and such, push the detail retrieval and the resolution forward a lot more than this one does, particularly the micro stuff like texturing and the real subtle things that are in there get pushed forward more. This one probably pushes that stuff, the micro detail stuff, again, the really subtle stuff, the texturing, you know, the how long decays linger and that sort of thing. Like it brings those micro detail stuff out a little bit more forward than true natural, but not overly aggressive. And so then again, like putting those two together, it's not overly dynamic and impactful in a macro sense. It's not going to be a hard-hitting DAC. It's not going to be a really snappy DAC on like things like snare drum hits and like those kinds of things where you like a nice quick snap to them, or at least I do. It's not going to have a ton of that. Again, it's not poor in either category there, but it's not the focus of its sound. And then those micro details, the texturing, how long decays linger, like where room reverbs and all of that are coming from, and the delays between the room reverbs and all that, like those more micro things are just a little bit more than natural in their forwardness. So a little less macro, a little more micro in its sound. There, okay? And then let's come back to the file types for a moment, because again, the most important thing I think is to get into 24-bit territory or use DSD for this DAC, because that's when its good qualities come out. However, I couldn't resist the temptation to use digital files that were upsampled in PCM using Galactic Gargle Blaster, up to, like, if it was originally a 44.1 kilohertz file, upsampling that to 352.8 kilohertz, or if it was originally a 48 or a 96 kilohertz file, all the way up to 384 kilohertz. Okay, 24-bit there. And you do get incremental improvements to the sound through this DAC as you go up in sampling rate. So again, the most important thing is to get into 24-bit territory or use DSD. But now sticking with PCM, if you go from, say, 96 to 384, you do get an incremental improvement. One of the albums that I upsampled was Fear Inoculum from Tool, which is an amazingly recorded album. If you're a heavy metal fan and you like well-recorded heavy metal music, there's an example of it, okay? That album I initially had downloaded at 24-bit 96 kilohertz, and that sounds pretty good natively through this DAC. But at 384 kilohertz, using the upsampling, or I guess a better term would be using an oversampling program to just create a 384 kilohertz file, okay, and then putting that through here, the DAC got even smoother, more resolving, like more of the subtle details came out, more of the texturing came out even more. It got a little bit more holographic. The spatial presentation didn't necessarily get bigger. It's not an overly huge soundstager to begin with. I don't know if I talked spatial presentation yet. The soundstage is not all that big. You're definitely going to find bigger. It's not intimate or small, but it's not huge. Okay, but it is fairly three-dimensional when you get the right files going through here. And you know, laterally imaging separation is good. Depth and layering is good. Again, with the right files. And like going from 96 kilohertz sampling rates to 384 kilohertz sampling rates increases the overall three-dimensionality and holography of the spatial presentation. It just becomes more natural and realistic and believable in terms of where it's placing things, and then also putting space between sounds in its soundstage. Never going to be a huge soundstager again, but within those sound fields, you do get an improved spatial presentation moving up in sampling rate. And again, the DAC just also becomes even more smooth, more refined, less fatiguing, and generally more listenable and enjoyable to these ears with the increased sampling rates. So it really is a DAC that benefits from oversampling, even though it has no digital filter in it to do oversampling. So this DAC is an excellent candidate for people who enjoy using external oversampling filters. HQPlayer by Signalist being an example. Or, as I just mentioned, Galactic Gargle Blaster, which is an online program. I think you have to download it. But anyway, it's a program that will take your 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz files or 2496 or whatever and oversample them and create for you a new file that is 24-bit 384 kilohertz, or you can go all the way up to 32-bit, what would it be, 1586 kilohertz if you want, and kind of everything in between. Okay, but if you like doing that kind of thing, using HQPlayer or upsampling your files like that, then I think this DAC could be of high interest to you. Okay. If you're just using it for 16-bit 44.1 without any digital filtering before it, I would not recommend this DAC. I did not like its sound in that situation at all. Not only was it harsh and fatiguing, it just didn't sound particularly resolving or anything like that. It's not a $4,600 DAC for 1644.1 files. Okay, just isn't. All right. Let's do a couple of quick comparisons here then. Like I mentioned, the Matrix Audio Element X2 Pure, which is a DAC and streamer I did a review for. I definitely prefer the Voce over that one for everything but 1644.1 that is not upsampled. The Voce is more three-dimensional and holographic in its spatial presentation. It's more coherent than in its spatial presentation. I thought the X2 Pure kind of scrunched everything towards the center image, and then didn't have as much to the left or the right. Even though it still sounded really wide, it was just kind of odd in how that was done. See my review for a more thorough explanation of that. When you run really high-res files through here, the resolution, I think, outdoes what the Matrix X2 Pure does without any upsampling. And I really didn't check oversampled or upsampled. Those two terms are kind of interchangeable, sorry. Okay, I didn't check those kind of files on the Matrix because it does all of that internally. Most DACs do that upsampling or oversampling internally, all that. So I didn't really check files that were already done that way on that one. Okay. But for everything other than 1644.1 Redbook, I would take the Voce over the X2 Pure. All right, what about my trusty and longtime reference, the Berkeley Alpha Series 2? That is a Delta Sigma DAC, where this one is R2R. Interesting comparisons there too. The Berkeley does not really do high-resolution files beyond 24-bit 192 kilohertz PCM, and it does not do DSD. Okay, so it tops out at 24,192. It has digital filters in it, I think presumably to upsample everything that's not yet 24,192 to 24,192 before it does its decoding. And at its best, meaning with upsampled 24-bit 384 kilohertz PCM files, the Voce is probably a technical equal to my Berkeley. They resolve details and present them differently. The Berkeley is a more physical DAC. It definitely has more of the macro dynamic impact, you know, the hitting and the snappiness of drums and all of that. It has that. But it also has all of the micro detail stuff that the Voce has to offer, maybe pulled back just slightly in terms of emphasis, but it is all still in there, maybe at a slightly more realistic level to my ears. The Alpha S2 from Berkeley then has a much bigger soundstage as well. It is a bigger soundstage. It has a much more grand and epic kind of presentation in terms of soundstage size. I would say they are roughly equal to each other in three-dimensionality and holography within their sound fields. It's just that the Berkeley is bigger. The Berkeley does not struggle with any file type that is common out there. It's just as comfortable at 1644.1 as it is with anything 24-bit up to 192 kilohertz. So it does not require external digital filtering, to my mind, as nearly as much as the Voce does. Again, especially with 1644.1. It doesn't need that. All right. The Alpha S2, though, can be just a little bit too aggressive in the top end on some files, particularly poorly recorded tracks. With a poorly recorded track that's a little bit too bright and sharp to begin with, the Alpha S2 is not going to save it. It's going to take all of that brightness and just fire it right down your ear canals. Well, at least for we headphone users, it's going to do that. The Voce being a little bit rolled off in the top end is a little bit, and just generally a little bit sweeter in how it presents, because again, the Alpha S2 is a little bit more in-your-face, aggressive, and incisively neutral, where this one is just a little bit smoother, laid back, okay, a little bit more relaxed in its presentation. So if you get a bad recording in particular, the Voce is a little bit less fatiguing. So there are some quick thoughts on how those two compare. I'm still going to be keeping my Berkeley. I'm not going to be selling it and trying to get the Voce in here because I don't do a ton of oversampling or upsampling specifically on my own. So the Berkeley is the much better choice for me. I also personally prefer a bigger soundstage. Okay, so that's, and the more macro dynamic impact. So that's why I'm keeping that. But the Voce, in the right circumstances for it, is excellent. So again, who's it for? If you are a fan of using external upsampling or oversampling, be that with HQPlayer or PGGB, okay, this should get your attention. And then in particular, if you are not real wild about frequency extension and you're okay with a little bit smaller soundstage, and then you like a more relaxed, laid back, a little bit slightly more micro detail focused kind of sound that's still pretty neutral, then this DAC is for you. So it is going to find a bit of a niche market, okay, but within its niche, it is quite effective. All right, so I will go ahead and put my recommendation on the Voce S3 for that niche that I just described. All right, I am Wave Theory. Thanks for watching my review of the Aqua Acoustics Voce S3. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment if you have not already. Check out my PayPal and my Patreon, and generally do those things you do to support YouTube channels. Thanks again for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.